Things don't get much more entertaining around here than this. As you know, we host many authors, almost as many authors as Chris probably has guests on his show MSNBC Hardball. Do you ever get asked to name your favorite guests? We get asked a lot to name who our favorite authors. Howard and David Cohen, for those who couldn't hear him. But we get asked, and we usually try to duck the question. But I will say this about Chris. He is, without a doubt, the author who is most energetic about promoting his own books. and for us, that is a very, very good thing. And we are very grateful to Chris, because he really does appreciate the importance not only of politics and prose, but of independent bookstores around the country. For his last book about Jack Kennedy, Chris stopped by the store frequently to sign copies that we had in stock, and he often would take time to chat with customers who approached him. So his irrepressible personality works great in retail. In Tip and the Gipper is his 7th book, and he's spoken here at P&P about all of his books, stretching back 24 or 25 years. This one, of course, is particularly well-timed. The subtitle is How Politics Worked, and as he says in the prologue, he wanted to provide an historical lesson in how bipartisan cooperation can work, even between two leaders like Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, who had opposing political philosophies. The book was released earlier this month on the day the shutdown began, underscoring he knew it was coming, underscoring how skill in finding common ground is so desperately lacking now in this town. Working for O'Neill for 6 years, Chris had a behind-the-scenes view of the speaker's dealings with the president. And in writing the book, Chris was able to draw on his own journals as well as on interviews with others who also were there. The result is a work that's part memoir, part biography, and thoroughly a lively and informative read. As one reviewer wrote, if it were possible to require each and every member of Congress from both parties to read any book on statesmanship, Tip and the Gipper might well serve as a guide to leading our country out of this quagmire. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Chris Matthews.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for buying this store. And thank you for keeping it alive. It's one of my great places to go. I love to come here, to go downstairs, not always buy something, but tonight's different. You have to buy something tonight. And no, as we in the labor movement say, no free riders tonight. Anyway, this is the journal I kept. One of them I kept for those 6 years. It's an old accounting ledger, and you say I did by hand and cursive writing. And my handwriting was much better back then, so I actually was able to underline it. And someday I hope this is in a museum as an example of a journal, because ever since they started having subpoenas, you don't get this kind of firsthand account. The book, I'm not going to tell you, the book's a book of stories, like all my books. There's stories that you wouldn't know unless you were in the culture of politics every day. And some of you have been there, you know what it's like. The stories you hear, the stories you live, the personalities and how they deal with each other, the back room and how different it is when the cameras are on, the way they talk differently, how Reagan talked differently than you'd expect. I have some of that in the book, in the dialogue, rough talk, male talk, if you will, among males. It captures, I think, the difference between the politics you see and the politics you don't see. I always, in terms of my job with Hardball, my favorite, although the results weren't favorable, I thought that the coverage of the recount was fabulous because, as I said at the time in 2000, this is the first time the American public has seen what politics is. It's not debates, it's not speeches, it's not press releases or ads. What politics really is the fighting for position and the exploitation of advantage and the exploitation of another person's disadvantage in the back room. It's the struggle over power and everybody using what they bring to the table, playing their strengths, working the other side's weaknesses. Al Gore got beaten in that one because he made a mistake at the end. He didn't ask for a full recount. Had he asked for a full recount, he probably would have won. So it's just those tactical decisions people make, or even strategic ones. Sometimes when you're too cute, your lawyers are too clever, you lose the game. Sometimes it's better to just swing away and go for the home run. Now, my book's based on primary sources, I am stunned more often than you wouldn't believe it. Whatever your politics, you ought to take a look sometime at the work that Douglas Brinkley did in bringing, thanks to Nancy Reagan, actually she's a friend of mine, bringing to the public the Reagan diaries. These are really great sources because although there's some trivial stuff in there, the weather, he always does a weather report that day. And there's always the stuff about who of Nancy's friends' husbands he has to hang around with that night because she did all the social selection. But there's also the really good stuff about his dealings with Gorbachev, deals with O'Neill, how Gorbachev reminded him of his relationship with O'Neill, how people react to each other. And it's a lot of the good stuff. There was also a guy I didn't even know was quietly, Eric Schwartz, he's now an attorney downtown. He was a young man then working for the Rules Committee of the House, and he secretly recorded every single morning press conference that I was standing next to Tip at. So we have verbates of every word Tip spoke. So there's two really good primary sources. And then the third primary source is this baby. This is 82. I've got some others. And this is really basically my day-to-day account of the fights between those guys, my attempts to plan the future, which is all in there, trying to figure out how we're going to win the election in 82 after losing in 80, and all our plans of how to do all the protests I would organize secretly, and counter-protests, I should say demonstrations. And my favorite line from Tip is when he would say, "Is this one of yours?" Which to capture Tip's wonder was my greatest joy. To actually make this old pro who'd won 50 straight elections and primaries impressed with me once in a while was my joy, because he would fight with me too. So I wrote about it based upon what I had as my material. Now, what do you write when you go down to write? Well, you try to write what you know. And I've got three areas I want to write about. And this is the first one that I know about. One is, and those of us who are here will know what I'm talking about, the strange, distant world of growing up a Roman Catholic in the early 1950s and how different it was from today, how strange it seems from today. People are nodding their heads. It was really strange. The punishments, the Gothic nature of the whole thing. I want to get the hiding under the desks when the airplane's coming and all that general judgments 15 minutes away and all that, the stuff we all lived through. And a mix of religion, ideology, and current events, all exploding together as part of your daily routine at school. And then I want to write about the 60s. And where I lived, the 60s was in not just grad school, but in the Peace Corps in Africa, and the whole lost generation, fight between generations, and how your fathers didn't like what you're doing, and the whole thing. A lot of us my age know what that's about. And so I want to write about it because my kids seem fascinated with the 60s. The whole ooh ka-choo thing, the whole listening to the Beatles, and over again, the music of the Beatles in the background, and Buffalo Springfield and the whole thing. I want to get that. They're ahead of me. But this is the one I wanted to write first because it's about politics. It's my material. Every morning I was there with the speaker. Every evening, every weekend, Kirk O'Donnell, the late Kirk O'Donnell, the chief counsel, and I would be the Democratic Party. I was the one that fought for equal time and established the idea of the networks giving equal time to the opposition. I had to fight every time. I was more successful with NBC than CBS, but I succeeded establishing the precedent. I used to, every time Reagan said something on Saturday, I had to make sure there was a Democrat there to respond to him. I had to do it every week. I had to fight for guys to find him with the cojones to do it. A lot of them didn't want to do it. They're afraid to go up against the guy. I had to, every time Reagan said something we didn't like, I had to make sure somebody responded to it. And so we'd go over the weekend. I was sort of the weekend relief team with, all by myself. I was going to say with, it was me. And so I did all that, and I was a real political operative, and I was a real partisan. That's what's interesting about the book, I think you'll find, is that I'm not coming off as some St. Francis who didn't believe in politics. I love politics. I love political debate. I love the battle of left and right. And the arguments we have in this country are going to be with us as long as everybody here is alive. And we're always going to have a mixed battle because this country's not going to be a one-party state. You can be the happiest liberal in the world, the biggest dreamer in the world. It's never going to be a one-party liberal state. It isn't going to be that way. And you could be Ted Cruz. Well, he can think anything he wants to think. But it ain't going to happen. We're not going to be a one-party right-wing state, thank God. It's just that we are mixed. We're very much, and nobody ever thinks about these things. We're very much like the French. The French are a bourgeois country right in the middle. They never go too far either direction. You can dislike them if you want. I like them, okay? I think they're great. But they're always somewhere in the middle politically. And if they're not, they went with Leon Blum, they went too far left. They lost their unity, but they dug all that. It's about as far right as they've ever gone. And he was great. So I think he was their greatest hero in history. So I think that our country has a true north. It's about, right now, I can't say if it's center right or center left. It's somewhere there. And anybody gets that wrong is wrong. That's where we are. And you can be a bit to the right of that or a bit to the left of that, and you'll be happy in American politics because you won't be far off. But the fact is, we're going to have to learn how to collude, ultimately collude, ultimately get in the room together and say, you know what, I think you got the upper hand, so you get 60-40 this deal. I got the lower half. I got to take the 40. But that's the deal. It's hardly ever 50-50. People say, I want a deal between husband and wife. It's never 50-50. It isn't. Just think it through. What's been your experience of 50-50? It's always somebody, okay, because you want to live, because what you want to really do is not give it away. You want to hold on to the marriage. It's the marriage you're investing in, not the other person. You're investing in the unity, and the unity requires giving, and you got to leave some money on the table to make it work. And these political deals that I talk about in the book are real. They're progressive in many cases. They get us through the 80s. They made Reagan a better president. I think Tip O'Neill ironically took him from being a radical to being a conservative president. I think fighting him on Nicaragua kept us out of that war down there. I think a lot of times because he put his foot down and said, no, Reagan was a better president. He didn't do it for that reason. But that's the way a good political process works. The opposition keeps you in balance. It fights your worst impulses. Now, Reagan had some other forces helping him stop, and one of the reasons he will go down the history books as one of the top 12 presidents for at least the foreseeable future. I can read the books. I can read the perspective on this. Ending the Cold War, I think Nancy had a lot to do with that. Nancy Reagan, I think that Jim Baker had a lot to do with it. Reagan was the great anti-communist, but he saw an opportunity to get, and ironically, everything I've been able to find said he hated nuclear weapons. He hated MAD. And you can say he was nuts about SDI, but I think Gorbachev believed we were going to do it. One of the great ironies in history. It was one of the great bluffs of all time. Gorbachev knew one thing. The Soviet system would never come up with it because you can order 10,000 boots of the same size and the same style, and you'll get them. Try to get somebody to design an interesting boot or try to get them to design an interesting weapon. No, they're just good at doing duplication. The communist system, central planning, the whole idea of it, systems analysis, wasn't working for innovation. We need the garages in this country to do that stuff. And Reagan bet on them, just like he bet on the forward pass in the Newt Rockney story, as if that was when they invented the forward pass. But in the movie it said that, oh God, they just invented the forward pass, Notre Dame wins again. Or the idea of supply side, which is you cut deficits, you cut taxes, and somebody bring in more revenue. But how about you do SDI and end the Cold War? I mean, he always wanted to do to Ronald Reagan, there was always the forward pass from the movies, the happy ending. And his belief in that happy ending, ironically, sold Gorbachev on the fact he couldn't win the battle. So Gorbachev put up his arm and said, we can't win this thing. Said, uncle. And that's the best thing ever happened to us because we were taught by the nuns, the bombs are coming. And then when Gorbachev came down the street here on 17th Street, down in front of, Duke's. And Duke came running out to give him some bagels or whatever the hell it was he was throwing at him. I was jumping up and down for joy. I said, this guy meant we don't have to hide under desks anymore. This guy means the world's not going to blow up. So I'm a romantic to some extent, but sometimes there are happy endings, like to the Cold War. So the book's about that. It's about me having grown up politically through all this 6 years of every day with the toughest job I've ever had in my life. Nothing. My favorite job is also in the beginning of the book, is writing speeches for President Carter. Without a doubt, my favorite job is being on the old Air Force One with a Selectric 2, typing as the plane took off at 90 degrees, the notes for the next speech. And I just went over to the Reagan Library to talk a couple weeks ago on the new book, and they have that plane. And I went up and sat in my seat with some people I know, and it's all there if you ever go out there. By the way, it's a nice attraction. You get to walk around the old Air Force One. So I sometimes feel like Zelig. You know, I was there during all this stuff in my life. I was there in Berlin when it happened, interviewing people on the other side of the wall, the people living under communism who were basically betrayed by the system. They believed in the system, the good communists. They believed in running schools as principals of schools and running factories as managers and doing their job and realizing they're being paid in lousy currency, and while the system at the top just completely betrayed them. I don't want that to ever happen here. Systems go down when you betray the people who believe in them. That's when systems fail. So anyway, the other story was I was also lucky to be in South Africa when they had the first election. I was lucky to be in the Peace Corps in '60 in Africa. I was lucky to be in Northern Ireland when we finally cut the deal between the Protestants and the Catholics. But this story is one I was with for 6 years, every day with Tip O'Neill, a great man. And I've written about him in the book as a guy who was a big fat guy, wasn't great looking, absolutely a true believer, He wasn't some phony liberal that was playing to the interest of the pressure groups. He wasn't doing it to make people happy. He had an individual notion after 30 or some years. He started in the business of politics in the 30s. And he had this individual notion of people's needs. The working class kid who couldn't go to college. And by the way, North Cambridge is filled with those kids. They all go in the military. That's why every time you get to a little corner in North Cambridge or anywhere in Mass, you see the flags. The kids were killed. The Irish kids, the Italian kids. And he knew that these kids should go to college. And the other thing was old people and sick people. He was not a big supporter of the swell at Harvard. But all those stories are in the book about where he came from. And all the stories about where Reagan came from. And all the stories about the praying together, the drinking together, the eating together, the planning together. This book is packed with that stuff. So I'm sorry to say you have to buy the book. I'm not giving it away. You can ask me 50 questions. I'm not giving the stories away. But somebody said to me the other day, this is the best book I've ever read. So I like that one. I'm going to remember that one. This is the first time I've repeated that in comium. But I'll be glad to take questions now because I think the rule is 20 minutes and I'm almost there. So I'll try to do 20 minutes of questions. And do you go there or do you stay where you are? You have to get to the mic if you can. I'll take all the questions, but make sure everybody hears you. You're only there. You're all alone.
Well, someone will join me.
Okay. Well, I don't know. It's up to the host. Thank you. You, sir.
Yes, Chris, good evening and welcome. And love your show, watch it every day. Please tell Richard Wolff that the video stream does not work well on Mozilla Firefox now. And could you please comment on Comcast MSNBC TV's over-reliance?
Try richard.wolff@msnbc.com.
Thank you, sir. And could you please comment on Comcast MSNBC TV's over-reliance on commentary from Washington Post reporters? Thank you.
No, I can't. I work for Comcast and I read the Post. So I do think the Post has lost some of its crackle, if that's what you mean. It had, when I first came here and I took the 33 bus up to the Hill, Nicholas von Hoffman was there every other day. Nicholas von Hoffman was writing for the paper. Think about it. Poster. There was fantastic stuff in style. You had Joseph Kraft. You had all those great columnists. You couldn't miss them. And I don't know if it has it anymore. I don't know why. I think it was Ben. I think it was Ben Bradley. I think he was magical. I think everybody wanted to impress Ben. And he's in his 90s now. He's getting old. He still looks like Ben. And boy, this city mattered because of him. And I think people matter. He was a great leader. I still want to impress him. And he's gone. And they haven't found his match. And I don't think the Grahams have been looking for his match, which bugs me. They should have been looking for they should have given up on the charisma and said, okay, we're not charismatic. We'll find somebody who is. You know, that's my tough line for the day. Everybody's afraid that, God, there might be somebody here. But I just love that big broadsheet on the bus, opening it up to read Sally Quinn's latest, bombing attack, destroying somebody. But it was great stuff. Yes.
I also enjoy every evening your show, although sometimes I only can catch the last part of it.
Why is that?
Because I come late from work.
Oh, that's good reason.
Right. Anyway, I wanted to ask you, who do you
think... That's why we moved it to 7.
I appreciate
by
that.
The way, the numbers have been
I do appreciate that. That's what I mean.
We got 1 million and a third people the other night. We're beating everybody. Of course, my quest is to triumph over Fox.
I appreciate that.
I'm going to do it.
I was able to catch the 7 o'clock anyway. Who do you think in Congress today could be the Tip O'Neill?
Oh, God.
Is there anybody?
Well, in terms of values, there's a lot of people. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, has a tremendous leadership ability. She doesn't get great press. But she has that old big city ethnic tribal kind of ability to unite. Her dad and her brother were mayors of Baltimore. She's really from that background. She comes from that really tough discipline of the old party systems. I mean, you didn't get a snow button. You didn't get to plow snow unless you were loyal to the party. I think she would completely understand that today. I know guys who really like her and also fear her. I think Machiavelli taught us fear is better. And I think she keeps count of who has been good. Those numbers are incredible. I think the other night she got 100%, 200%, on an issue of raising the debt zone, which is not a winner with the voters, because it sounds like you're raising the debt. It's always a tough one. And the fact that she could hold them together on a leadership vote was powerful. I think she has a lot of it. I think in terms of illustrating what liberalism's all about, I don't think she does that as well as Tip did. I think Tip was very good at saying what liberalism is. It's caring. It's caring about people, caring about their Social Security, caring about individuals and how they rely on government. He did believe government was vital. And I think that we do now more than ever the last 2 weeks understand the role of the government. And it wasn't just the monuments, which I understand, or you discredit people when you bring them down. It wasn't just, but when the NIH started getting a bigger support than it ever got, all of a sudden Republicans are boosting the need for research in healthcare. You know, something has turned there. So I think he was really good at that. And I don't know. I think Chris Van Hollen. I think Van Hollen is growing. I think he'll be speaker someday. Whenever Nancy will not stop questing for speaker until Steny Hoyer's out of the way. That battle is going to go on and on and on. Tip and Reagan are nothing compared to that one. So, but I do think that it's Van Hollen. Who else do I like? I like Donna Edwards from around here. I think she's got all it takes. And a lot of the older guys just didn't get their chances. I mean, there's so many African Americans are just historic figures. John Lewis and Jim Clyburn, incredible people. Even to know them is an honor. I just overwhelming. There are also some hacks in politics. There are hacks from the big cities. They're not about it. Just get pushed up by the big city machines. But I want to go through some of them. I think I've always said my favorite senator. She's a bit old now to be president, but is Dianne Feinstein. I think she's a grown-up, and I really think she is. I'm watching Jill LeBrand, who's an unbelievable fundraiser. I think Chuck's going to be leader. I think Chuck Schumer has got integrity and chutzpah like you've never seen. Like you've never seen. He knocked up D'Amato by never stopping to pick up the body. He just kept going. And I think Schumer has the honest approach that if all the Democrats were as honest about immigration as he is and Teddy was, they'd have a much better shot of getting it through. He believed in making the system work. He knew he was writing a law. Not just an idea, but a law that you should be proud to enforce. That's what I keep saying to people. Don't pass another stupid Simpson-Mazzoli. Pass something you're proud to enforce. We have a right to protect our border. We have a right to decide who comes in the country. We have a perfect right, like Swaziland does, to do it. The Mexicans do it. We can do it. But do it progressively and fairly and without discrimination. So I think we can do that, but you have to put your head down and say, we're going to do it. It's going to bother some Hispanic groups. It's going to bother some labor groups. But we're going to do it right. And I think that I would look at that guy. Anyway, yeah.
Chris, I also watch your show every night, and it's terrific. But my question, as an expert on John F. Kennedy, I'm writing a book on the Stevenson draft movement at the 1960s.
Oh, I remember it well.
1960.
I watched the whole thing.
But one of the great controversies of that convention was how Kennedy picked Lyndon Johnson. Yeah. I was looking at Theodore White's book, and Theodore White suggests that Mrs. Johnson was worried that Johnson might have another heart attack, and she thought that being vice president would be less stressful. And then...
Do you think that's true? Do you think she wanted to that was going to slow him down? But, he was busy in other quarters.
But
he might have ended up like Nelson Rockefeller, you know?
Now, Robert...
I don't know, but you're asking me, look, my theory is there's so many parts that, there's the Phil Graham part, you know, there's the Tip O'Neill part of carrying the word from, in my earlier book about Sam Rayburn, telling him Lyndon will take it if it's offered, which blew Kennedy's mind when Tip told him that, because he never thought he'd take it. He'd give up majority leader to be number 2. And so when he found out that, then Kennedy acted on that, because he knew he needed the South, and boy, he did. If he didn't carry the South, he wasn't going to win. So he made the absolute expedient move, which drove Bobby crazy, drove the labor guys crazy, Ruther and the rest of them. But he did it, and he wouldn't have won otherwise.
But,
and so I think that's my theory. So I don't. If you got a new theory,
well, the new theory, I interviewed the leadership of the Stevenson organization.
yeah,
And they tell me that Clarence Cannon was what I should focus on. Clarence Cannon was the parliamentarian at the convention. And first he ruled that Governors Lovelace of Iowa and Docking of Kansas had to stay with their favorite sons on the first ballot.
I remember that.
And then a few hours later, he reversed himself.
Yeah.
Now, could it be that Johnson called Kennedy and said, look, I'm interested in being vice president.
That wouldn't have happened.
That
wouldn't happen.
I'll facilitate your nomination on the first ballot. No?
No, because Johnson would never plead for the job. He was too proud, and I don't think he would have said, please make me vice president. He would have had it done through intermediaries, and we could always have plausible deniability. But let's talk about that sometime. I don't think everybody's as fascinated with this subject as you and I might be. I mean, I'm not being sarcastic entirely. Yes, sir. But I do think it's a fascinating question because we're always going to ask these questions about how these things happen. And Jack said to somebody, you'll never know the whole story, basically because I don't want you to know it all. Because it's a great question. Yes, sir.
Chris, I'm a huge fan. I'm from Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. You've got a lot of fans out there.
I know. I know, because it's the last all-Irish city.
Yeah, absolutely.
Scranton, yeah.
So my question...
I spoke to a friendly son today. There's 1,100 white guys in front of me in tuxes. And I looked at the crowd and I said, is this still legal? It's outrageous. It's the way they sell holy water up there. That's how they keep going. It's true.
So my question is about your time as President Carter's speechwriter.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of criticism has been leveled that, Carter just didn't do a good job of sending his message out and all this stuff. But that ignores that, right after the malaise, quote-unquote malaise speech, his approval actually went up by a little bit. So I was wondering, do you think it was more the underlying conditions of the country?
Yeah, three I's. Yeah. Inflation, interest rates were, imagine today if you had interest rates in the high teens, inflation rates in the high teens. Where you'd brag about your money management account. We all had our new money management accounts. They gave you about 12%. Oh, I love this, I'm getting rich. No, it's 16% inflation. You're not getting rich, you're getting poor. So it was stagflation, and then the emblematic moment was the hostage taking. And it was okay for a while. But after 3 or 4 months, it helped them beat Teddy. But after a while, people said, this guy can't do the job. And I will never go back in history and know for sure if we had a really tough-ass president who made people afraid of him, whether the people over there with some brains in Tehran, even though they hated us for a lot of reasons, good and bad, that they would have stopped that effort. That they wouldn't have dared break our diplomatic protection there. They wouldn't have dared commit an act of war against us. So there was a sense we were weak, or why would they commit an act of war against us with impunity? Now, I don't know if Reagan had been there, had been right after the Patco strike breaking, after something really tough, maybe they wouldn't have done it, but then he would have had to decide what Carter wouldn't do. So I think Carter was a pacifist. I look back, I don't think he believed in using the military. He just didn't believe in it. Obama is a dove, but he's not a pacifist, as we know. But he is dovish, like I am. He doesn't believe in wars as the first solution, second or third, but he will kill the bad guy. Whereas I think Carter, with Desert One, was a statement of almost like we're Israel, we're a little country, we have to do things like a little country does, like Entebbe. That was no way to do it. We couldn't sneak into there and sneak out with those hostages. That wouldn't have worked. Our guys would have been pinned down, and then we'd had a really terrible situation. So I think he was not the man for that job of being commander-in-chief. But I just think the emblem was Iran. It was humiliating. Every night, America held hostage on ABC at 11:30 Eastern. Every single night we watched our flag being trampled on and our people being trooped around in blindfolds. No American generation will stand for that. That's why I lost. But he's a good man with great values.
Absolutely.
And I'm very proud of everything he stood for. I just think it's a tough country to lead. We're in a tough part of history. We have to defend ourselves. And he didn't do it adequately. But things could have been worse. We could have been in a war with Iran, we'd still be in. So I always want, everybody says, let's go fight Iran. We'll just bomb them. We don't like their weapons, we'll bomb them. Yeah, well then what? They're at war with us, as long as they'd like to be. And so is Hezbollah. So these are really tough questions. But I think it was the three I's. Yeah.
Yes, Chris. Two things. One is that in your book you had talked about your beginnings at Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
And I thought, as I was reading it, about the latest protesters who were going after the cops who were not being paid while they were actually doing their work. And I thought about your background and what that, and I thought you
Well, I was there during the, it's ironic because I was a patronage policeman. I was one of those guys that worked during the daytime like Mike Barnico or Harry Reid, where you work in the office as much as you can, then you go work an 8-hour shift to sort of justify your salary. So I was working 2 jobs. But it was interesting because it was during the moratorium and all that stuff in 70 and 71 rather. And so I just come out of the Peace Corps. So some friends of mine, or at least one friend of mine, Tom Wenzel, was in that demonstration. And I was underneath the Capitol with all these, what do you call them, the SWAT teams ready to go. Wow. It was going to be much more violent than it was. But it wasn't that violent at demonstrations, we know. It wasn't violent at all. So there wasn't any SWAT teams going out there beating people up. But I remember one guy coming up to be a tourist and says, "Hit him once for me." I mean, there was a real anger then, too, about the war.
Well, so...
But, I mean, today's not like that. But the issue of the police and all, and the Vietnam War was just horrendous.
But I wanted to ask you, because you didn't have it in the book, I didn't see it, but you gave a great talk in Boston about Tip O'Neill 100th anniversary. Yeah. And one of the best anecdotes I think I ever heard in politics about anybody was the one that you told about the teller. I think it was at Cambridge Savings. Yeah. And I thought maybe you want.
Yeah, he was tired of the Irish Catholics not getting promotions, and he basically warned the owner of the bank, if you don't give this guy a promotion, I'm going to walk up and down Commonwealth Avenue, and I only have to walk up and down once or twice, and this bank's closed. So I'm going to tell everybody to take their money out of this bank. Thank you. That was, by the way, the kind of thing that he was most proud of, besides the Cape Cod seashore for the more elite people. But preserving natural resources was when he appealed to certain people, but the street corner ethnic stuff he was very proud of. Yes, sir.
Hi, Chris. One of the things I remember about the 80s when Reagan was president is that every time he would say something and the press would kind of go at him, you'd hear, "Let Reagan be Reagan." Yeah. Well, thank God that didn't happen. Well. No, it really didn't. I mean, I think, as I said, Jim Baker said, focus on what you ran on. Cutting taxes, cutting the size of government, building up defense. Don't go into all this religious stuff. Don't go pushing. I know, and I'm Roman Catholic, but every time they had a right to life rally, every single year, he would address it by public address, by electronics. He never showed up. He sent the message, I'm with you politically, but don't think I'm really one of you. Oh, that's part of the
strategy. And he was very careful about getting involved with the religious right, for example. And he obviously had signed the most pro-choice bill in California history and all that stuff. There was a difference between Ronald Reagan, the commentator, Ronald Reagan, the columnist, Ronald Reagan, the guy that read Human Events, and the guy who was governor of California, and the guy who was president of the United States. He seemed to be tempered by, I think, his wife, by Jim Baker, by picking Jim Baker, by his the opposition to him. You know, the Democrats controlled the House, and I think Reagan had to be careful.
Okay. One of the reasons I was asking that question is I noticed that with the present president, it seems that when he ever speaks his mind in public, it comes back at him for a couple of weeks.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Being African-American is something that none of us as president have ever experienced. He's the only person who's ever had that role in history. And he's had to worry about, you know, angry black man, the whole thing. I watch him every day. I try to understand. Why didn't he yell at that guy? Because a picture of him yelling, even what I do every night, you know, not every night, but just the idea of raising your voice, he can't do it. He can't. He's constrained because, he's a loud black guy. Rah, 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 rah. You know what'll happen. And so with Henry Gates, when he did say something with Trayvon Martin and the whole thing, he said he smiled in the way he says it, but even staking out a point of view has always step back on this one. Well, but I think it's a challenge he has, and I think all through this shutdown, he's had to be Mr. Cool. By the way, he is cool. I mean, he just is. I don't mean cool like an hip or anything. I mean cool like no drama Obama is not a joke. The guy has an amazing ability to just, maybe because he comes from a mixed background, which is fascinating. He knows both worlds. He was raised by not his white mother, but his white grandparents. He really sort of chose which society was going to join in many ways. You know, he could have chosen where to be, who to associate with. He clearly is an African American, well, not just by birth, but by choice in a way. He just is.
Well, sometimes
and I think
it's not by
I mean
choice.
that socially, not physically, obviously.
I know what you mean. The reason I was asking that is that back in 2011, when they were having the first debt ceiling argument in June, and he said that the GOP needs to let's stay here, let's get it done, and then the next day, so-called liberal press said he's a dick.
Yeah.
So and then just recently,
I think it was a particular writer that did
I
that,
know.
but that's right.
And
I got to
then,
take it back, actually.
and then it's recently.
We all want this guy. Everybody who's president becomes this sort of vessel that we fill with our dreams, and some people fill with their hatreds. And he's just a guy. I mean, I want him to be everything. I want him to be the guy that plays cards every night with the members of Congress and makes personal friends so he can use them to get stuff done, and he can rely on those bonds. He's not that guy. I was thrilled by his speeches. They grabbed me. They moved me. As everybody knows, I've never heard speeches like the ones he gave in the primaries in my life. If anybody's in those rooms of 200 people in New Hampshire, it was overwhelming. He grabbed us. He did in 2004. I said right afterwards, here's the first African-American president. I mean, I just knew it. I didn't know it'd be right away. I said, that's the guy, because he's amazing in his description of America. His ability to talk about this country and what it could be is beyond anything we've heard, maybe since King, since Lincoln. And I just think the keynote speech just made him president. And so, like Stevenson, I mean, he's a guy, Stevenson got nominated because he gave the welcoming speech in Chicago. He didn't even run. He just gave this, he sounded like, Ronald Cohen. And one of those great old British actors, he talked like that. Let's give him some slack. That's what I try to do every night. I say, look, I wish he'd do certain things, but he can't do everything. By the way, he is the luckiest person on the planet. And I see that, look, Syria was fakakta, right? Syria was hopeless, and all of a sudden we got Putin doing our dirty work for us. He's over there handling the investigations, looking around for chemical.
Yeah, well, he doesn't want Chechenian rebels getting those hands on those
said,
chemicals
let's go in
either.
And start a war over chemicals that aren't even there. I like the guy that gets them when they are there and avoids doing it by war. I'd call him a wonder man when it comes to that. And I think he must have created Ted Cruz, don't you think? Just get me somebody wild from Texas and let him imitate Joe McCarthy for a couple months, and we'll have something there. Because I'll tell you, the best thing the liberals have going for them is this vivid illustration we've had the last 2 weeks of the alternative.
Yes.
Just think about that alternative. It's not a bunch of mild-mannered suburban Republicans who just want lower taxes. It's not a bunch of corporate guys that just want less regulation. No, it's that. The right wing in all its glory. Yes, sir.
Hi, Chris. I've watched your show religiously since the 2004 election, 13, and when I was 13, I haven't looked back since. Also, as a
since when?
Since I was 13 in the 2004 election.
God,
so
I love that.
Yeah. Also,
so you're only
22. Yeah. Also, as somebody originally from the state of Utah, I've got to say Frank Moss is legendary among me and the other, I guess, 15 Democrats from our
Frank
state.
Moss was.
I'm sorry.
The last liberal senator from Utah.
Yeah, the last Democrat we've had from Utah. Hatch has had the seat for 35
years. He was a really nice
years.
guy.
Yeah, he's legendary here. My question, actually, I guess, is a young person question. Among my generation, I see a kind of a changing consensus about what the role of government can and should be. A lot of this is because we're relying on federal student loans throughout the education system.
What's your rate? What rate are you paying?
I actually was lucky enough to avoid that.
What's it, about 8?
Just the average, yeah.
And what was for us? 3.
Yeah. And because of that, we want somebody to, I hate the phrase balance out, but we'd like some assistance. And even among conservative friends of mine, they tend to believe in somewhat of an activist government. And my question is, at what point does this new consensus among, I guess, the millennial generation come head to head with what seems to be relatively policies of relative economic austerity that we're seeing at the moment? Does that ever come to a head? Does one have to give way to the other?
Look, we got a debt that's as big as our GDP. And we're not reasonable about it. We have last time I looked, 15% of our GDP was taxes and 25% was spending. And I say to the liberals, at least tax enough to pay for what you believe in. And to the conservatives, do the same. Tax enough to what you believe in. It should be about 20. And then we'd have half the deficit. But the people don't even believe in taxing up to what they all agree on doing. What all needs to be spent. You got to pay the interest payments. You got to pay defense. You got to pay Social Security. You got to pay Medicare. Medical bills are not subject to adjustment. They are there. So these costs are real. They got to be paid. Pay them. Yeah. And that's my question. Why don't they all agree to do that? Why don't we just say the United States government will pay what it spends? We'll do it as much as we can given the cycle, the economic cycle. But nobody wants to do that. They don't want, not very few of them want to say, let me see how much I spent in the budget this year. I better make sure taxes are that amount. Or maybe I should reduce the amount of spending this year because you really can't tax people to death. They don't reconcile it. And that's why I like the old Senate Budget Committee I work for, because we try to do it every year. And back in the 70s, you will not believe this, Ed Muskie, my boss, was fantastic. For 3 years, I was on the committee. He and Henry Bellman, the ranking Republican on the committee from Oklahoma, had the same budget. How far we've come. They used to negotiate. They used to negotiate on spending and all the budget priorities, all the various government accounts. And now we've got Patty Murray trying to do it with Paul Ryan. And I heard them beginning their discussion. And I'm worried because they said they want common ground. You're not going to find much common ground. What you're going to find, if you go looking for it, are balanced compromises. That you can do. Or else we're just going to be stuck talking about the debt all the time till we're dead. We'll always have the debt, so when you keep talking about it, what does it accomplish? Just another grounds for argument. So I think it can be done. And if they both go back to their caucuses and say, I had to do this to get that, but we have to do something. Yes.
Hi, this is great, and I watch your show religiously, as does probably a lot of people here. My question's about moderates in Congress, and so...
Okay, who are they? I mean it. Who are
Susan
they?
Collins.
I'm thinking
Collins.
I'm thinking of very few. Peter King, maybe. I'm thinking a few people. Maybe 15. Grimm from Staten Island. Maybe Pat Meehan. Maybe Mike Fitzpatrick. Maybe I don't know. The ones that are sort of the inner suburbs that aren't wealthy suburbs, but nearby suburbs. They can go back and forth. And right now, a lot of them are Republicans. That's why we have 232 seats right now in Republican hands, because those seats, for gerrymandering reasons or whatever, have tilted Republican, whereas the big cities are 85% liberal. That's what's going on. So moderate, Susan Collins, Chris Christie, although I think he's a little too anti-infrastructure. Should have built that tunnel. The problem isn't just moderate. It's the Republicans are trusted to do stuff they don't want to do. And Democrats want to do things they're not trusted to do. If you had Republicans build a train system in the country like Ike was, they trust them. Democrats talk infrastructure, but everybody says, they'll just piss it away. They'll spend it on interest groups, or the unions will grab a chunk of it, or somebody will grab it, and they'll call it stimulus. What is that? Would you buy anything called stimulus? No, I'd say I would buy a house. I would buy a fast rail train system, and that would cost money, but I wouldn't just go out there to pee it away on anything. And the way the Democrats did is we'll just stimulus. It's the worst word in history. But, if you say you're going to build something and put a lot of working people to work for 10 years or 5 years, and it's going to create exponential jobs to do that thing, here's a picture of it. That would excite people, even in these times. Capital budget, not just an operations budget, a capital budget. Who's trusted to have a capital budget and not just throw it away somewhere? The Republicans, if they believed in doing it, but Eddie Rendell believes in it, and Arnold Schwarzenegger believed in it, and the great Mike Bloomberg believes in it. Some people have competence and are trusted on these things, but the libs aren't. That's too bad.
So
moderate would be somebody who wants... No, I'm answering your question. It's not simple. It's not just a person with a 50% voting record. We don't need that. We need people who can get things done.
Okay. Well, I was also going to ask, so polls suggest that it's like a moderate nation. We're trying to elect more moderates, and we're seeing, the Dems hope more moderates will get elected on the right. We're seeing all these primaries on the right. Do you think there will eventually be primaries on the left trying to elect more moderate Democrats? Do you think we should? Do you think that's where the country is going?
I think they're experimenting with that in California. They're getting away with the partisan primary. So it's possible you can win as a moderate. I can't remember the last moderate to win in either party. What you're afraid of if you're a black member from a big city, for example, I'll go through the list. If you're an African-American member of Congress, you're in the caucus, the Black Caucus. If you're in there, who's your worst enemy if you want to keep your job? Somebody younger than you to your left. If you're from Utah or you're from Montana, any one of the conservative parts, Mississippi, Alabama, the old Confederacy, what's your fear? Somebody younger than you to your right. You don't fear somebody to the center of you. And therefore, when in doubt, go to the right if you're a Southerner. When in doubt, go to the left if you're a Democrat. The enormous numbers of people have 100% ADA ratings, and 100% conservative ratings, because that's the safest vote. And that's been true for a long time. The tricky part is the suburbs. Because they should be moderate politically. So we'll see. So look to the suburbs. You're not going to see a moderate Democrat in the big cities because the unions will get to them and the interest groups. They'll be 100% with this, 100% with that. And it's not just the right wing, unfortunately. Yeah, please. You, sir, and who's ever left. Yeah, we'll just do the people waiting.
To the woman, I guess, in the back who whispered as to whether or not I was a basketball player. My name is Steve, and I'm a news producer and a former colleague of Chris's. And I have 3 questions. Of course,
Did somebody ask you if
producers
you play ball?
do, you know how we do. But I have a statement before that to the extent that this is about the influences on you. I will embarrass Chris and note that he has been a great influence on a number of young journalists, producers at NBC, like myself, Christina Jameson, Kerry Forrest. So thank you. And that deserves at least a round of applause. Very quickly, you love pictures, I love pictures. Whenever I think of Reagan, or the coverage of Reagan, I also think, almost always think of the man who shot Liberty Valance. This is the West. Between printing fact and
Jimmy
print the
Stewart
legend.
or John Wayne?
Yeah. Print the legend. So how much of Reagan's legacy has been more printing the legend than essentially fact? I mean, you mentioned Baker, one of probably the single biggest influence on his presidency. That's one question. Another question is, could you tell the Grover Cleveland story?
Well, I don't believe it.
Okay. The Grover Cleveland story, you don't
I
believe
think it's idiotic.
Okay.
So it's a story, but it's not a fact.
Okay. And the last one is, what's the value of the party system today?
Well, my book is based on primary sources. All the deals that were cut in the time I was there and the time the Speaker O'Neill was there are all fact. You can judge for yourself the quality of the tax bill of '82, the quality of the Social Security reform, the quality of the tax reform bill, 22.8% lowest rate, and equality with cap gains. You can look at the way some of this stuff I had to dig up, like the relationship with Northern Ireland, which Tip asked the president secretly. He said, "I'll never tell anybody about this. We've got to get to Maggie Thatcher and turn her around." And they did, secretly, and brought, of course, finally the Good Friday Accords, ultimately in the end of the Troubles. That I had to dig for. The relationship between Tip and Reagan and going to Gorbachev, that's all public record. Reykjavik, Geneva, Washington, Moscow, all these negotiations were accurate. Certainly the fights about Nicaragua I've got on the record. So I tell you the facts. And history's pretty good at judging, separating out legend, I think. I mean, we know George Washington didn't chop down the cherry tree, did he? It's meant to make another point, but what was the second question? Oh, I don't think this is a story that's put together, and I do agree there's a piece of it that may be Rashomon. You can believe it because somebody told it to you, and somebody else, 5 different people, 5 days. When Reagan first came in to see the Speaker, they talked about the Notre Dame movie, they talked about a lot of things, the Irish thing together, and Pat O'Brien and all that stuff, and stuff the Catholics tend to talk about. And then Tip said that this desk was the desk of Grover Cleveland, the president. He was the twice elected president from the late 19th century, the conservative Democrat. And according to Tip and one member of his family, not the rest of them, Reagan said, "Oh yeah, I played that guy in the movies." He played Grover Cleveland Alexander. It is absolutely impossible to believe that he thought that he wore a baseball uniform to play a president. And if you want to believe that, if that suits your view of life and it makes you go to bed by night, put your head down and say, "This head believes this garbage," fine. I don't believe it. I think what happened was Tip wanted to get something on the guy, and he said, "I can make him look like a fool." And he whispered that story out everywhere for a while. And of course, Barney Frank picked up on it and said, carrying it to his intellectually funny level, said, "Oh yeah, I guess he pitched a few seasons between presidencies." No, I don't believe that. I tried to be discriminating, is what I believed. The legend. Remember, you're the anti-legend guy, but you love this one. You cherish this baby. Anyway, thank you all. I'll sign every book. No, why? Yes.
Well, thank you. I'll be quick. Actually, my earlier question got taken. So, looking at the Republican Party now, and what do you think the long-term prospects are for a correction in terms of being dragged further and further to
well,
the
the
right?
presidential election coming
Really?
up. Elections decide the nature of a political party. I came along, a couple elections I think could have really changed this country. If Dewey, the governor of New York, had won in 48, I think the Republican Party would be very much a centrist political party. Big New York, used to carrying New York, used to carrying Pennsylvania, Illinois, the big states. It would have been something like the old New York Herald Tribune. A little bit right of center. That was what the party could have been. Party of Lincoln still. But because they lost that, and because the Goldwater people came in the early 60s and grabbed control of the party the way that Ted Cruz wants to do now, grab the party. May not win the election, but grab the party. That seems to be his goal. Now, the Democratic Party has been pretty consistently center-left, and much more center than people think, but center-left. It's had a social ambition to complete the social, the safety net, and it wanted to include health. But it's wanted to do this, and has said it wanted to do this since FDR. And the Republicans at least gave lip service to it through Teddy Roosevelt and Nixon and the Heritage Foundation. They all said we have to do at least an individual mandate. Nixon was for a tougher employer mandate, much tougher. He said, if you hire anybody, you got to give them health insurance. That's how tough Nixon was. Unfortunately, Ted Kennedy undermined that. I mean, really unfortunately. So it's not like this is some brand new Orwellian scheme. This has been on the agenda of this political party in every speech I can remember, in every platform. Everybody, Bob Casey, I don't care who you are, has supported this idea because we know we cannot defend a crowd like this sitting in the emergency room because it shifts all the costs of healthcare to the hospitals and the providers. It's a ridiculous system because we have to care for people when they come in the hospital. And so, but the party has not changed in its basic philosophy. It's a social democratic party, but a very mild social democratic party compared to Europe. And it hasn't really changed. And I don't see it. The Republican Party has moved off to the right and have tried to make Obama into some sort of lefty, un-American, whatever. And the evidence isn't there. Certainly, here's my last thought about Obama, because I do think he gets underestimated. Think of the white guy conservative and his attitude towards blacks, if he's not a racist. And most aren't actual racists, just to have a certain attitude. I want all black men to be good husbands. I want them to be responsible to the children they have, get married. I want them to be clean, ethically. I want them to be clean in terms of the law. I want them to raise kids with discipline. I want them to not be money grubbers, but go out and have good jobs and do good for society. Obama's done every single thing right. He is perfect, a perfect man by the definition of the conservative white guy. And they still give him shit. Okay, that's my problem. Thank you.